Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, Georgia. It's really a pleasure for me to be here. My name is Anna Roach. I am the Executive Director and CEO for the Atlanta Regional Commission. I'm really excited about this panel because at ARC, we're long-range planners. Our plan for the Metro Atlanta region stretches all the way out to 2050. And you better believe sustainability is at top of mind for every urban planner at ARC. So very important conversation for the region, and as evidenced by the fact that it's being prioritized by the chamber, very important conversation for the state as well. If you have had a package delivered anywhere in the continental United States in the past year or so, you will see many more electric vehicles delivering our packages. You might also see some electric flying objects as well. We're very excited about the future of technology in this space. And so we're going to have a good time having a conversation about that. It's going to be a real treat. This conversation with this incredible panel. We're going to try to unpack some of the strategies that are behind each of these incredible developments and how we communicate, how we ship. And we're going to talk through how these shifts are being impacted by the incredible growth that we are experiencing statewide and the transportation sector as a whole, and how we're going to advance both technologically but in a sustainable way as well. So it is my pleasure to introduce this esteemed panel, all of who are leading in that space. Zach Marchlik, did I say that correctly? He is the Vice President of Sustainability with UPS. Our friend since the pandemic, right? I can't imagine how much your volumes have grown since then. Jeff Cleland is the Senior Manager of State Transportation Public Policy with Amazon. Also, how are y'all doing lately? You're not.
Small books.
And then Tosha Perkins, who's the Chief People and Partnerships Officer at Archer Aviation, is our third panelist. Please help me give them a nice warm Georgia. So I want to start with you, Jeff. Amazon has announced a net zero carbon emission goal in the near future. And they're highlighting strategies such as renewable energy sourcing, and just as of last week, announced the removal of 95% of plastic filling and packaging. Tell us a little bit more about these Amazon strategies and what's on the horizon.
You took all my talking points. Sorry, there we go. Before I get started, thank you for having us here. This actually reminds me, several years ago, I spoke in front of the Manhattan, Kansas Chamber of Commerce, and it was right after my alma mater beat Kansas State in a bowl game, and I was moved out of. Luckily, Syracuse will never beat a Georgia-based team, so I think I'm safe. But yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah, we did make a climate pledge. I've been with Amazon a little more than 5 years, and about at that point, we made a climate pledge goal to be net zero by 2040 in our operations. And with that comes a lot. It's buildings, it's on the road transportation. Right now, our buildings are about 90% net zero emissions in those buildings, sourcing from clean energy sources like solar farms. I think we have 8 solar farms in Georgia alone. But before I get on like some of the more on the road transportation things that you might have seen out there, like electric vehicles and some of our trucks, we really like to kind of think of it at our building level first and where we put our buildings that play into our climate pledge. So we, at the end of 2022, flipped a switch to regionalize our operations into 8 regions in our country. And so before that, you can think of it this way, that when you ordered a package on Amazon, it probably came from somewhere outside of Georgia or outside of the Southeast. Not all of them, but some of them. I believe we have 19 fulfillment and sortation centers in Georgia and now 10 delivery stations. So as we've grown, we've gotten our buildings closer to our customer. We're able to store and ship those packages closer to our customer, reduces vehicle mile traveled, reduces our carbon footprint overall with that regionalization. Now we're to the point where 76% of our goods are shipped, stored and shipped within the region of our customer. And so you can imagine getting that delivery station closer to our customer reduces the carbon footprint, but getting the actual storage of that in our fulfillment network closer to our customer. We don't have to put it on an airplane. We don't have to put it on long haul trucking. We can do short haul trucking. So that plays a big part of it. And then on the transportation side, you've probably seen on the roads in Georgia our Rivian electric vans. We now have over 13,500 of those on the road in 1,800 cities. But with those electric vehicles comes charging infrastructure that you have to have. We now have the largest private charging infrastructure in America with 17,000 chargers at our sites at over 100 cities. There's obviously a lot of challenges that come with that, but there's a lot of opportunities, and we like to look at it in that lens of having opportunities. But one of the bigger opportunities we see out there is truck traffic. And trucks right now, I believe, make up 5% of traffic on the road, but 27% of emissions. And that's a big, the transportation emissions are growing faster than anything else right now. You can think back to the Industrial Revolution when manufacturing was kind of what caused the most carbon output. As those standards have gotten better, transportation has still gone up as it's grown. And so we see a lot of opportunities there with green hydrogen. We have over 3,500 renewable natural gas and natural gas 18-wheelers on the road, and kind of continuing those investments. And then on the packaging side, last thing I'll say is, yes, about 2 weeks ago, we made that announcement that now 95% of our shipments are getting rid of those plastic fillers and going to recyclable paper padding, which is a huge step for us. And it's going to save millions and millions of pounds that are going into landfills every year using recyclable goods. And I believe, yeah. And so I think it was 2 million pounds of goods we've saved in that. And then we've also done a project started a few years back about shipping your own container. So if you're a seller on Amazon, you can send us goods into our fulfillment network that we can ship as is. As you could imagine, that comes with issues during the holiday season when you order Legos for your kid and it shows up and not in an Amazon box. And they're like, we'd appreciate it. But we really like to think of that as it's a customer choice, but it's also a good kind of business decision of we want to make sure that those goods show up undamaged in kind of their own container. So that way they don't have to be returned. And so that's all helped into our.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see that as the private sector is responding to our new normal and our appetite for, just in time delivered services and goods, is that you are responding with sustainability in mind. So that's very exciting. Thank you for sharing. To begin, I would like to delve a little into UPS's sustainability efforts as well. So Zach, UPS announced a goal of reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. With a goal of using 40% of alternative fuel in the ground fleet by 2025. Talk a little bit about the multi-pronged approach that you all are taking to accomplish this.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, we think of our approach as using a rolling laboratory. So we look at, we're a technology agnostic shop at the end of the day. So what's viable at scale, right? We have 140,000 power units on the road around the globe. Right now we have over 18,000 alternative fuel vehicles. We leaned into LNG early on, right? As we kind of worked with our maintenance engineering department and understood what's really viable, what can we do at scale that's actually going to meet the service levels that we require for our business. We actually pivoted into more of a CNG footprint, and then since then overlaid renewable natural gas on top of that. So we think of it in terms of what are drop-in fuels in an internal combustion engine, where can we go lean into things that can go reduce the carbon emissions associated with those, where is there new technology that needs to come online and the infrastructure to support it. So Jeff talked about electrification, charging infrastructure, right? There's a lot of variables at play in terms of how you go solve on that front. So we look at it as not a one-size-fits-all solution. And for us, we're out looking at a lot of Class 6 and Class 8 vehicles. So on the heavier side of the equation where, yes, there are EVs available today, but really not at scale for those size vehicles. So that's the balancing act where we continue to test new technologies in our network at small scale. Where things make sense, we accelerate deployment. And so we will continue to do that as we move forward, and then overlay what is the emissions profile associated with that to really find the best bang for the buck in terms of reducing emissions and ultimately making sure that the business is still competitive.
So you're really pretty confident about that 2050 date?
2050 is a long ways away, right? Focused on 2025, we had a 230 basis point increase in our alternative fuel usage year over year, 2023 over 2022. So you feel good about that, but we're about 28.8% of our fuel usage was alternative fuels. So you say, okay, well, that's great. You can increase 2.3%, but now you got to solve for another, right, 11+% on top of that. There's levers that we're working internally to go maximize the infrastructure that we've already deployed inside of our network, and then looking at different commercial opportunities to go solve. And what it does require is that it's not the sustainability team working in isolation, right? For us, it really means that we're working cross-functionally with all of the departments across the organization to make the best decision for us as an organization and make sure that all of our stakeholders are bought in, because you can solve one area of the company and this feels like a good solution, but then you could talk to a different part of the company and they go, hey, this creates a lot of challenges in my operation. So finding that balance is key. We feel good about our pathway forward to the 2025 goals. We don't consider them like in the pocket, in the bag at this stage, but we've identified a number of levers that we can go execute to ultimately go hit the goal.
Yeah, it's what I'd love for you all to pay attention to as you think about sustainability is how much the private sector on the commercial side is doing their part, and you should feel assured that on the public sector side, we're doing our part, and then on the individual side, you all are doing your part. There has been an uptick in the adoption of electric vehicles, and it's our responsibility to make sure that everybody has the infrastructure that they need to be able to accommodate that uptick. And so we're working at the Atlanta Regional Commission. We received a grant of $6 million. We're going to install 200 to 400 chargers, which doesn't seem like a lot. But when you think about it in combination with what the private sector will be doing when they are building office buildings and building residential and what the commercial sector is doing, I think we're building a robust infrastructure for this energy transition. So very exciting for both of you. Tosha, I want to turn to you now. Archer Aviation brings really a whole new mode of transportation to the forefront with your electric aircraft Midnight. Could you share a little bit more about the aircraft itself, but also tell us how this new option is poised to transform our transportation system, including the impact on sustainability objectives?
Yeah, absolutely. So Midnight is a fully electric, so it's battery operated vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So it's essentially a flying car. And it holds 4 passengers plus a pilot. You do need to have a pilot's license to operate this vehicle, and that is because of the regulatory environment. So there are other companies out there, I'll actually talk a little bit about them later, that are building autonomous vehicles, flying cars that we could all own in maybe 10 to 15 years. But for us, we're taking a really practical path to build consumer confidence, showcase the brand, how this can transform our transportation. So we'll do that with a very safe vehicle that I just mentioned that will be piloted with an individual who has a commercial pilot license. How this will basically open up is in 2026, you will start seeing routes where you'll be able to take an air taxi. So this will be like Uber of the skies, essentially. And in fact, this was actually initially started by Uber. So if you go back when Uber started, some of you may remember they tried a division called Uber Copter. Uber Copter was essentially a helicopter service that was meant to serve as an air taxi. So they took Uber up to the sky. The problem with that is, one, people don't like getting in helicopters because they're incredibly unsafe, and they actually are very unsafe. 2, they're really loud. And so in a lot of environments, you actually can't operate helicopters because cities have banned them due to the noise. And that noise is generated from the big propeller that makes the whoop, whoop, whoop sound, which is important because I'll share why ours doesn't do that in a second. And then 3rd, the reason it didn't work is because people are demanding sustainable forms of transportation. So when Archer looked at that, they said, how can we fix all of those things? One, the good news is battery technology exists today where it can actually lift an aircraft into the air. The challenge that exists is the distance. But when you look at the data, the amount of trips that people would use this for are really between 20 to 50 miles, because those are the trips that take you 90 minutes when you're just trying to go 20 miles. And the good news is battery technology exists today that can serve that market. So we'll be launching in 2026. Initially, what it will look like are what we call trunk routes, which is basically if you're trying to get to the airport, you live in the suburbs, you need to get to the airport in Atlanta, you'll go on and book a flight, and you'll be able to add this on as a service so that you can get to the airport airport in 10 minutes. You'll see that in New York, Chicago, Miami, which are the first 3 cities that we've officially announced to launch. But I have a feeling it will come very fast in Atlanta because we are actually manufacturing all of these vehicles in Covington, Georgia. So we will be, the walls are up at that site, by the way. If you're down at Covington, it's at the airport. Take a drive and see it. And we will be officially moving people in and hiring people into that facility end of this year.
That is really and truly very exciting. If you know anything about the Atlanta Regional Commission, we're the metropolitan planning organization for Metro Atlanta. And so again, we plan out to about 50 years. We have $168 billion worth of investments between now and then in transportation. And what we're really thinking about are advances like that and what our built environment needs to look like in the future to accommodate this kinds of transportation technology. So very important stuff. We're going to be watching Archer very carefully over the next couple of years to learn from you all about how we need to adjust our expectations and our environment to accommodate that technology. So thank you for sharing. So we talked about changes in technologies in transportation. Each of you talked about that and what the sustainability goals are and processes toward that. But we also know that Georgia's supply chain infrastructure has experienced significant changes over the past 5 years. We've seen unprecedented increases in demand on our logistics systems. Everybody in this room probably has a package being delivered from UPS and Amazon today at their doorstep or tomorrow. Tell me, each of you, and we can start at that end and work our way this way. What do some of those growth challenges mean for you? How has your company thought about those challenges? How are you addressing them? And how have you been in the past year successfully navigating some of that growth and demand on our logistics system?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And the growth that you've seen here in the last 5 years is kind of probably similar to the growth that we saw as a company, especially through COVID with the kind of a boom. But our physical footprint grew, and like I spoke of earlier, getting closer and closer to customers. I will say we've gotten a lot smarter on where we put our buildings. When a lot of the buildings first popped up, it was kind of what site was first available and that. But now it's what green space we can use that is near highways, so that way we're not congesting, certain back roads and able to get on and off. And also working closely with state DOT, because this isn't just a siloed approach from the private sector. I'd say here in Georgia, you probably have one of the best DOT secretaries in Russell McMurray that we've worked with, and so it's working with the DOT in that on kind of the traffic patterns and where we're putting our buildings that will be helpful in kind of mitigating some of those. I will say Georgia's still one of the strongest states to do business in, though. With those constraints, I think
It is.
with that growth, and probably not just the growth of the last 5 years, the growth since the Olympics, brought this city kind of up with that. And so still one of the best states to do business with, the port systems, the road systems, the rail systems throughout the state. And so I think like our growth has kind of gone along with that, but it is a public-private partnership to make sure that we're growing smartly.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I think maybe a way to explain it for us is when you think about aviation as it exists today, private aviation manufactures around 600 aircraft per year. And we're going to be more like an automobile company in terms of our manufacturing rates. So we're going to be looking at the thousands per year initially to start out. But again, you can kind of think of this scaling like a flying car. And so when we're going out and sourcing parts, we need a lot. And it looks very different than what it looks like in aerospace today. So that's certainly been a challenge, especially as a startup small company. When you think about batteries as an example, each of our aircraft has 6 battery packs. Each pack has 1,400 cells. So when you think of how many cells you need to get, for starters, there's only 2 companies that exist today that make these kinds of cells that will power lift that kind of weight. And then when you go to those 2 suppliers, who's Archer? and why do we need to supply to you? We've got, especially with the electric vehicles, a ton of companies that exist today. So it's certainly been a challenge for us, and how we've solved that is through a lot of our partnerships. So one of our big partnerships is with Stellantis, who is the third largest automobile manufacturer, and essentially they have a lot of buying power. So our ability to leverage their buying power has really helped us to continue scaling the company.
Yeah, I think for us, when you think about the small package market, right, you kind of had during COVID a big acceleration of activity, and you've had a bit of a regression to the mean in terms of e-commerce penetration relative to total expenditure for the consumer. So when we think about that, what does that mean from a growth perspective for a company like UPS? How do you go manage the infrastructure and the assets to match supply and demand? So there's an ongoing activity, right, to understand how sticky do we believe this to be, and then ultimately what do we need to go solve? One of the things, initiatives that we've launched as an enterprise, what we call Network of the Future. So how do we think about the footprint of the company and what makes the most sense both for today and for tomorrow, right? UPS grew organically over 100 years. And if you had started the company today, you might not have ended up with the same footprint that you would have had through that growth. So now there's a bit of a rationalization exercise to understand what do we really need, and then ultimately, therefore, what do we want to go do moving forward. But then also thinking about the technologies that are not necessarily viable today, but we think will be viable in the future, whether it's from an automation standpoint or electrification standpoint. So how do you make sure you future-proof your buildings, your infrastructure, and your assets? Because right, those you're dealing with those for decades at a time. So it's not necessarily a solve for just right now. So it's balancing those things at the end of the day that is challenging, but it ultimately provides good opportunities. And where there's a growth story, that's always the most beneficial place to go be.
Very good. And that's actually an incredible segue into the next question. We've talked a lot about what you all are doing now to prepare for sustainability in the future. Where do you see the greatest opportunities to advance sustainable transportation solutions? And what kind of trends are you seeing within your respective sectors that are emerging? And how do you anticipate the trends are going to impact our overall sustainability objectives? We've got objectives coming from the federal government. You've got individual company objectives. But what's sort of the future of this as you look ahead? Why don't we start with
Yeah, I love the way you frame that as opportunities, because there are obviously a lot of challenges, but it's we're a company that prides ourselves on invention and inventing and innovating our way out of problems. I think one of the biggest opportunities is in that middle mile space that I talked about, that heavy truck space. Large polluters, there's not that many available out there. And I think, as Zach had mentioned, like we're testing multiple options out there, and a really good opportunity, again, is these public-private partnerships. And what does the future of that infrastructure look like? And I don't think it looks all electric, and I don't think it looks all hydrogen. I don't think it looks all natural gas. It's probably all of the above. But do the truck stops of America right now currently have the ability to do those? And the answer is probably no. And so we're going to need those. We're going to need diesel pumps, because those are still there. My father owns a trucking company in Syracuse, New York, and he's going to be on diesel for a while. But companies like ours are able to make these investments, and we're going to need places to refuel, and truckers need a place to sleep and get off the road safely. And so I think the opportunities are going to be there that are the most exciting for me in that heavy truck space.
Yeah, I love you're tugging at my heartstrings right now, talking about freight. How do we keep the folks who are transporting our goods to us safe? How do we keep our roads safe? And that is something that keeps us up at night at the Atlanta Regional Commission. The state has a very, very robust freight plan. We don't have all the answers, to your point. There's still so many unanswered questions about how we're going to address those things. But both the state DOT and the Atlanta Regional Commission are working on aggressive and coordinated freight plans to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, so specifically in the AAM space, which is advanced air mobility, or you might hear UAM, urban air mobility, and that's where Archer sits. I think it's just important to bring everyone's attention that this is happening across multiple sectors. Cargo, so Beta is another company who's also building an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. We've partnered with Beta on the infrastructure side. So being able to build similar infrastructure where they can land for cargo, medical supplies, et cetera. We also have a large contract with the military. So I think you'll see military services start using this to be able to get into areas where they couldn't go before, safely, sustainably, et cetera. And then I mentioned there's a company called Whisk, which is building an autonomous eVTOL aircraft. And that aircraft would replace all cars eventually, as crazy as it sounds, just like the Jetsons. So people will say to me, oh, it's like the Jetsons. And I say, actually, if you go back and look at the Jetsons, you'll notice those were fuel operated cars. It has a little puff of smoke coming out the back. So we are actually more advanced than the Jetsons. Who would have thought? But so this is happening all around us. And I was chatting earlier about the excitement internationally for this as well. You'll probably see this launch internationally even before the United States, although we do have a desire here in the US to be first. And then I think it will continue as battery technology continues to advance. You'll see more regional options. You'll see probably hybrid options. So this is really the start to fully air sustainable travel.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think when we think of things, right, I think to Jeff's point, there's the middle mile opportunity from a road transportation perspective. We also operate a large airline, right, with over 300 aircraft. And so we're obviously tracking sustainable aviation fuel pretty closely. And so when you think about sustainable aviation fuel, you think about renewable diesel, there's kind of an interesting opportunity from an overall economic perspective when you start to look at the value chain to go bring those fuels to life. So it starts to bring in the agricultural industry, right? It starts to bring in upstream logistics associated with that, refineries and things of that nature, where when you start to piece all of those things together, we think there's a really interesting opportunity on that front that helps ultimately, right, us go decarbonize, right, the global industries go decarbonize, but also provide economic opportunities that, might be in more underserved communities than where traditionally jobs are showing up today. So when we look at those things, we think, hey, that's really interesting for us as an organization and, interesting for us within the industrial space.
That may have been your answer to my last question. You always previewing my last question, but it's a very good segue. My last question before we open it up to the audience to pick you all's brains and mine, if you'd like, is what is the thing you're most excited about in this sustainable ability space for your organization, for your company, and what's the thing that probably keeps you up at night? And you can reuse your answer.
Sure. Yeah, I think the most exciting portion, I think it's what I just talked about, but also just the multifaceted approach out there where, right, it is not a one solve all solution, and therefore you have to be thinking about all these different pieces coming together, which kind of then leads into, right, the keep you up at night, which is a lot of the times like what's actually viable today at scale. Right. That's where it gets really hard, where yes, you might be able to do something in one specific area or one specific building for one specific route. But when you're solving for 100,000 routes, right, that you're like, oh, shoot, that really hasn't moved the needle. And that's what we need to do as an organization. So how do you go find that balance? And there's dependencies on things that are totally outside of your control. So when you think about electrification, right, you're reliant upon the grid, you're reliant upon the utility companies who might have their own tariffs in place and timelines in place that you have no control over. So how do you go balance all of those things and make sure that you're doing the right thing at the right point in time with the right stakeholders to ultimately put yourself in a position to hit the goal, knowing that there's going to be challenges out there that require us to be dynamic, which is right, that is the transportation industry, is responding to change, responding to challenges and being dynamic. So how do you make sure that you have enough diversification, enough solutions out there that give you enough coverage at the end of the day to give you the best shot to go do the best thing?
Balance, balance, balance. Tosha, what are you most excited about? What keeps you up at night?
Yeah. So maybe a little bit of a personal answer. Prior to coming to Archer, I was in oil and gas. And, my kids, I've always been a working mom. So my kids would always ask why I missed the soccer game or whatever it is. Then when I told them what I did, that generation's like, you do what? Ew. Why? You're the person that puts all of that in our environment. And so I promised myself that the next thing that I found was going to make them proud and really be for their generation. And that's why I'm at Archer. And this is my little fan. He's my middle here I try to let them see what this looks like and really integrate them into what is going to be their primary form of transportation. And I really believe that. So that's what makes me excited. What keeps me up at night, I think, is exactly what Zach said. For us, we have to have infrastructure. We have to have charging. We have to have the FAA regulation approval. We have to have, you name it, NASA, air traffic control. And so there's been such a competitive landscape between the AAM companies. You know, Joby is our primary competitor in the US, and it is very competitive between the two companies. And for us, we think we need to come together because we really all have to work together to do all of the things I just mentioned. So that's what you'll see us continue to pushing is like our partnership with Beta and Stellantis and NASA, and really trying to get all of the system together to push this.
Thank you. Incredible answer.
Yeah, that one's hard to follow.
Yeah. What are you excited about? Keeps you up at night?
Yes. What I'm really excited about, I think, is what I had mentioned. My father is a small trucking company, and being an early investor in some of these things will eventually be able to drive that price point down on a lot of these investments. Once it's more widely adopted, a company like my father's could then, go out and purchase a truck that's maybe the same price as a diesel equivalent, whereas right now it's a little bit higher. And so we're able to make those early investments, and I think that's really cool because that will eventually trickle down as it becomes more prevalent on the roads. Probably similar concerns. I think like government regulation just kind of steps in. It gets in the way of a lot of things. We do drone package delivery as well. And I know my colleague Will Cousert's in here, and it's been this long and back and forth with the FAA to get approved, and we've been approved. And then it's like the zoning and the local zoning. So a lot of these like steps are, I would say, slowing down innovation. They're there for good reason. I'm not saying there should be no regulation or anything like that, but that's, I think, the thing that keeps you up at night is that the slowing of innovation could be an issue from government.
Thank you for those incredible responses. I actually was going to say I'm really optimistic about the private sector and its innovation in sustainability and in alternative fuels and the like. And I was also going to say that it's important that the private sector works with the public sector to make sure these things get implemented to the benefit of our constituency. So when that is not happening and when the private sector is feeling like we are standing in the way, let's have that conversation. That doesn't make any sense because this technology is moving faster, as all of then we can monitor it, regulate it, whatever else. So it's coming whether we want it or not. So it doesn't make sense for us to stand in the way of progress. We got to work together to get it implemented. And the thing I think that keeps me up at night is wanting to make sure that we have the workforce in place for the technology that's adapting so quickly. When I think of the maintenance that's necessary for this new charging infrastructure we're putting in place at volumes we've never seen before, I get nervous that we won't have the right folks in place. So it's thinking about that workforce development piece, which is something that the chamber thinks about all the time. So that I'm excited about a public-private partnership for the future of sustainability and innovation. And what keeps me up at night is that we're not going to be able to find the workforce to maintain the technology that's coming faster than we think. So I just want to acknowledge Rob LeBeau, who runs ARC's Workforce Development Department here. We are thinking about that. We are not going to fail at that. So we've got great minds at the state thinking about it, great minds in the region thinking about it as well. So thanks for your attention. I think I have a few minutes to take some questions. We have 10 minutes to take some questions. So let's get a few in. You've got great minds here. If you will speak loudly, I'll also try to repeat the question. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Ann Rogers with AGCO Corporation. Really grateful to have heard you all today. My question's for Tosha. As you know, safety is a part of sustainability. This is the first I'm hearing about your technology, and I'm basically shell-shocked. Tell me how you guys are addressing this idea that, right now, driving in a vehicle, #1 cause of death. How are we going to, what does it look like having highways in the sky, adding gravity to this equation? Just help me understand how you guys are thinking about safety related to this completely amazing, ridiculous, future that we're talking about.
Yeah, so the question is, tell us about safety and how the company is thinking about safety, because obviously that's probably your biggest concern before you get in a vehicle like this. A few things. So one, I mentioned earlier why people don't want to get into helicopters. Archer has 0 single points of failure. So the redundancy and the safety on the vehicle is at the top. It is the highest it could possibly be for any commercial aircraft. Basically, it has the same safety standards as if you go get into a Delta aircraft today. And we are required to meet those same safety standards by the FAA. So the reason Archer isn't flying today, because frankly, Midnight is available. And if you're ever in California, you should come see Midnight fly. Or we will have the vehicle out here soon, as I mentioned, and you should come see it. You can get in it and fly in it today, but it hasn't been certified by the FAA. And in order to get certified, it goes through an exhaustive 6-year process to be able to get certified. And so we are still a year and a half out from that, 2 years out from that. We're saying early 2026. So we will at that point have type certification from the FAA, which basically means it has met all of the same safety standards as any aircraft that you get in commercially today, not private aviation.
Fantastic. Questions? I saw this hand first and then we'll go to you.
Just so I'm clear, this will pick me up at my house? Is this airport, or can I call and get around my house?
Define vertiport.
It's a great question. So eventually, the idea is this will pick you up at your house. It is capable to. But the reason we wouldn't be able to do that today, there's several reasons. But obviously, as you can imagine, we've got a ton of routes and things that we have to solve first. And by solving those routes, we'll be able to work out a lot of kinks on the actual customer service experience, the app itself. So in the first few years, what it'll look like is you'll be able to go on an Archer app, like a Uber. Yes. And it essentially will say, here's how you get to the closest vertiport, and here's the route. Here's how many minutes it's going to take. It's likely going to connect you. We call it first and last mile. So it's likely going to connect you to an Uber or a Lyft to get you that first and last mile. So it'll give you your full journey. Then the route itself will be 5-10 minute flight. And in the early years, it's probably going to be, as I mentioned, the trunk services. That's like, your nearest vertiport from your house to the airport. But then in the later years, and when I say later, 5 to 10 years, we're going to be seeing a lot of touristy type routes as well. And probably a lot more vertiports closer to your house that could take you to like a Braves game, as an example.
This is the coolest thing ever.
Advanced air mobility. Go tell somebody you learned about that today. Yes, sir.
Hey, Jeff Butterworth, Atlanta Gas Light, and having worked on both electric and gas sides of utility, I love both. But in a conversation like
I'm just
this,
saying that 'cause-
he knows that. In a conversation like this, hydrogen and electric take the air out of the room, but you both mentioned briefly CNG and RNG. And using transportation CNG with RNG can actually achieve negative carbon outcomes. I'd just love for y'all to talk about that a little bit.
Amazon, UPS, Jonah.
Yeah, no, I can start with that. No, for sure with RNG, we're seeing significant savings there, especially when we're getting from cow dairy farms and be able to source it from there. So we're pretty bullish on that. We think it's right now one of the best ways to get away from diesel. There's also renewable diesel options, obviously, but RNG right now, we've found a lot of farms out there that are looking for ways to get rid of the methane that they're producing out of their dairy farms. And what better way to use it than a Cummins Volvo truck that you can, it's basically the same engine with in same maintenance schedule. So yeah, no, we're seeing great benefits from that, and we'll continue investing in that space for sure.
Yeah, I kind of echo those thoughts, right? Definitely.
So one question. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So in terms of your sustainability policies, how does your ESG or your sustainability goals impact like your ESG program, or if you guys even have an ESG program within your organization?
I'll speak for the Atlanta Regional Commission. Understanding that we had to preserve our natural resources has always been core to our planning philosophy. As an urban planning organization, you can't build transportation infrastructure, housing, or communities in general without thinking about the impact on the climate and the environment. So that's always been core to what we have done. The difference is that we have the private sector now doing everything that they are doing, investing what they are investing to complement those efforts. And we've got a federal government who is very interested and willing to put their money where their mouth is. So there's just a perfect storm right now for the work that we do at the Atlanta Regional Commission. I'll let the other panelists talk about it. Do you have a policy in particular or?
Yeah, I think what I'd say is that our environment, right, what we consider sustainability is really the E at the end of the day. And then we have, right, different social programs across the organization. When we think about our foundation and the amount of, lives that we want to go impact there, especially from underserved communities, right, that plays into that. And the governance is really something that we've always done as an organization to make sure that we have good governance structures across the organization. Like for us, environmental sustainability is not new. Right. We've been producing a sustainability report for over 20 years, right, where we've always gone and measured these things. And now what we've done is increase the accuracy. Right. And then there's continued to be a focus on how do we go focus on decarbonization and make sure that's a primary impact. But I think, the UPS bought its first electric vehicle in the 1930s. So like these things aren't new to us. It's just what's viable at scale to deploy at scale and making those conscious trade-offs within the organization to ultimately go do the right thing.
I'm just a transportation expert.
Okay, we have our very last question right here.
Okay, all right. So I have actually two comments. I want to acknowledge Tosha for her title. And if you could define that title, it's beautiful. Chief People and Partnerships Officer. What is that? So I'd like to have that answer. I want to acknowledge bringing your children to work like you have today. Incorporating your work around your children is absolutely super kind of stuff. So congratulations to you. And then my third question would be, could you please make the helicopter sound again, but just
I think it was even better because this mic had an echo at the beginning. It's gone now, which is great. So first question, my title. Yes. So on the West Coast, the CHRO title is called Chief People Officer, although it's been more popular everywhere, but it's been around over there, which was hard for me to get used to, honestly. But how the partnership piece came into it, which it's actually a really good question because a lot of people are kind of confused by that. So I joined the company when it was 50 people back in early 2021. Just to give you a perspective, we're 900 employees now, and we have multiple locations around the US, including our Covington Manufacturing Center. But through that transformation, as we started, especially a startup having limited capital, as we started thinking about hiring people, we had to ask ourselves the question, are we the best people to be building this capability? So do we want to hire people inside to come together and figure out how to do this within aerospace? Or do we want to leverage a capability in another industry that already exists today? An example of that is the manufacturing. So we could have hired a mix of aerospace, aviation, and automobile manufacturing folks, brought them together and said, figure out how to do this at scale. Because again, the manufacturing facility, the way it's set up, the rates that it produces is very different when you're looking at the thousands than when you're looking at the hundreds. But why would we do that and take all that time to learn all of those processes versus just leveraging someone else who knows how to do that? So that's where the partnership with Stellantis came through those conversations. They're building the layout and all of what our advanced manufacturing will look like to be able to do this at scale. And of course, sure, there's knowledge sharing across, but it's moving much faster than it would have been otherwise. Very similarly, another partnership we have is NASA. And so a lot of you have mentioned, how is this going to be safe in the airspace, et cetera. So bringing them in from the beginning instead of hiring folks to figure out what that looks like. That's basically how it came up, is solving problems through people and realizing that that was a big part of the business need.
Okay. I am going to sneak this one last question in. If it's a rapid question, we can sneak it in before wrapping up.
Rapid question. Tosha, you said that midnight would be a lot quieter than a regular helicopter Why is that? And you are welcome to make noise.
Yes, forgot the noise. I'm sorry. So whoop, whoop, whoop. It's because it has the one big propeller that makes that noise. We have 12 small propellers, and that was a design choice. The noise actually is quieter than a generator. In fact, we did a showcase where we brought a bunch of investors out. We had a generator running for some power for microphones and internet. And the plane took off in the background, and we didn't even notice. We had meant to show the investors and talk it through, but we didn't even hear it. So it's much, much quieter because of the 12 small propellers.
Makes sense.
Fantastic. Thank you all for your attention, for your incredible questions. Please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause.